I never imagined that a normal Thursday morning could spiral into chaos. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, watching the sun pour through our suburban living room windows. Everything seemed perfect. Our neighborhood was quiet, the birds were chirping, and my daughter Emma was supposed to be finishing her breakfast upstairs. That illusion of peace shattered the moment my phone rang. It was the school. The voice on the other end was tight, nervous, almost trembling. "Mr. Daniels, there's been an incident with your daughter." My chest tightened. My mind immediately leaped to the worst possible scenarios. A fall on the playground, a playground accident, or something worse. I think she's okay," the secretary stammered, "but she was knocked down by some other students. It's unusual." My stomach sank. "Knocked down by who?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice calm but failing. They're from your neighborhood," she said quietly, almost apologetically. "From the HOA families." I froze. The HOA. Those overbearing, nitpicky, rule-obsessed neighbors who seemed to believe the entire street belonged to them. I could feel my pulse racing. How had this escalated from lawn complaints and petty notices to this? And why at school? By the time I arrived, my nerves were frayed and my head buzzed with possibilities. When I walked into the school hallway, I saw her. Emma was on the floor, sitting on her knees, her lunchbox knocked to the side. Her usually confident posture was shaken, and I could see the faintest tremor in her hands. Surrounding her were two of the HOA kids, smirking like they'd won some sort of twisted game. I wanted to march forward and demand answers, but something in Emma's eyes stopped me. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was calm. A quiet, measured calm that made my skin crawl. Whatever she was feeling, it was nothing like I had seen before. One of the kids stepped closer, arms crossed, trying to look intimidating. I wanted to yell, to scream at them for their audacity. But Emma looked up at them, her eyes steady, and I realized something. She wasn't going to break. My heart swelled with pride, and an equally terrifying fear of what she might do next. I knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" I asked, voice low, steady. Emma nodded, brushing her hair from her face. "I'm fine, Dad," she said casually, like we were discussing what cereal to eat for breakfast, not a full-blown confrontation with bullies. I swallowed hard. They knocked you down." "They tried," she said with a small, knowing smile. "But it's okay, I've handled worse." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Worse? What did that even mean? I glanced at the two bullies. They looked smug, overconfident, completely unaware that Emma was far from a typical middle schooler. I opened my mouth to scold them, to lecture, to make sure they understood that no one, especially not HOA bullies, had the right to touch my daughter. But Emma placed a hand on my arm, shaking her head gently. "Not here, Dad. Let's handle this later." Her composure was eerie, almost unnatural for a 12-year-old. I realized then that whatever skills she had, whatever strength she possessed, she wasn't going to waste it in a hallway full of teachers and students. But the thought that the HOA had gone this far, that they had the audacity to humiliate her, even in school, made my blood boil. As we walked out of the school together, my mind raced. Petty HOA fights over lawn colors and mailbox rules had always been annoying, sure. But this was a new level of audacity. And I had no doubt in my mind that Emma wasn't just a victim. She had a side I had never seen before, a side that was capable of defending herself and probably more. I couldn't help but chuckle nervously to myself. The HOA thought they were untouchable, that their rules gave them power over everyone. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or who they had just pushed too far. As we got into the car, I glanced at Emma. She looked out the window, calm and collected, like the storm hadn't touched her at all. But I could feel it brewing. Something was about to happen. And one thing was certain, the HOA was about to learn a very important lesson. I just didn't know yet whether I was ready for it. The drive home was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. My mind kept replaying the hallway scene at school, Emma on the ground, the smug expressions of those HOA kids, and that unnerving calm in her eyes. I tried to focus on the road, but every time I glanced at her in the passenger seat, my stomach twisted. She was silent, staring out the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. It was like watching a storm contained inside a little human body. I broke the silence. "Emma, you've been practicing karate, haven't you?" My voice was low, careful, almost as if asking the question aloud might make it all too real. She turned to me with a small, almost mischievous smile. "Yeah, you didn't know." I blinked. "No, I knew you were taking classes, but I didn't know you were, well, trained like that." She shrugged like it was no big deal. "I've been at it for years, state level, but Dad, I wasn't trying to scare anyone today. They just pushed me." My heart skipped a beat. State level, Emma, my little girl, the one who still begged me to tuck her in at night, was a state karate champion. Part of me was bursting with pride, part of me was terrified. Terrified of what might happen next, terrified of what she might do if provoked further. We got home, and I followed her into her room. She sat cross-legged on the floor, practicing a kata she hadn't wanted to show anyone outside her dojo. Her movements were precise, fluid, and controlled, every kick, punch, and block executed with deadly grace. Watching her, I felt a mixture of awe and fear. "Dad," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "I don't want to hurt anyone, but if they come after me again, they'll regret it." I swallowed hard. "You're not just defending yourself, are you?" She shook her head. "No, I'm making sure they understand boundaries. They can't push people around just because they feel powerful at home." I realized then that this wasn't just about schoolyard bullying. This was bigger. This was about the audacity of people who thought rules, status, or HOA membership gave them the right to intimidate others, and they had just picked the wrong target. Later that evening, as I tried to distract myself with emails and half-hearted dinner preparations, the doorbell rang. My pulse jumped. Who could it be at this hour? I peeked through the peephole. One of the HOA moms, flanked by her 2 daughters, the same kids from school, stood there, smiling like nothing had happened. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "We just wanted to talk," the mother said sweetly, though her eyes were sharp, calculating. "About what happened at school today." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what exactly do you want to discuss?" Her daughters giggled nervously, and one of them tripped over the welcome mat. I had to fight back a smirk. The audacity of these people was almost comedic. Almost. "We just think," she began, lowering her voice as if revealing a great secret, "maybe your daughter overreacted. Maybe it's better if everyone just forgets about it." I looked at Emma, who was standing behind me now, hands crossed, chin up, radiating calm but undeniable confidence. "Forget about it," I repeated. "She was knocked down in the hallway by your kids. You expect me to just let that slide?" Her eyes flicked to Emma, and suddenly I saw a crack in the armor. For the first time, I sensed hesitation. My daughter didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't smile, she just stood there waiting, and I realized the moment had already shifted. The bullies weren't in control anymore. They left soon after, mumbling something about misunderstandings and school policies. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling a mix of relief and tension. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. They thought they could intimidate my daughter. They didn't realize they'd awakened a force they couldn't contain. That night, I watched Emma practice quietly in her room. Each kick, each punch, each pivot was a reminder. She wasn't a kid to be pushed around. And if the HOA tried to push her, or me, again, they were in for a surprise they wouldn't forget. I sat on the edge of her bed and whispered, almost to myself, tomorrow, we make them understand exactly who they're messing with." And in her calm, unwavering eyes, I saw the storm coming. I didn't know how big it would be or how it would unfold. But one thing was certain. Life in this quiet suburban street was about to get a lot more interesting. The next morning, I woke up to an uneasy quiet in the house. Emma was already in the kitchen, eating breakfast like nothing had happened, flipping her toast in the air with a casual precision that made me suspect she had been practicing her timing even there. I tried to act normal, but my mind kept drifting back to the previous day. those smirks in the school hallway, the audacity of the HOA, and the calm, almost chilling composure in Emma's eyes. I had to know more. "Emma," I said, keeping my voice casual, "how long have you been practicing like that?" She paused mid-bite and looked at me, a sly smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Years, Dad. I didn't think I needed to show anyone, not even you." My eyebrows shot up. "Not even me." She shrugged. "You've always seen me as your little girl, not a karate state champion. That's different." I laughed nervously, feeling both pride and unease at the same time. My daughter, my little girl, had a side I'd never fully grasped, and now the HOA had accidentally poked that sleeping tiger. Breakfast finished, we made our way to school together. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest as we walked down the familiar suburban streets. Every neighbor's window seemed to hold a potential witness, every mailbox a silent judge. I kept glancing at Emma, who walked with a calm, measured step, head held high, entirely unshaken by yesterday's chaos. We arrived at school, and I noticed it immediately. The bullies were waiting. Not aggressively, but smugly, like they'd already written the victory speech in their heads. One of them waved casually, as if yesterday had never happened. Emma didn't flinch. Not a muscle in her face moved. I felt the tension spike like an electric charge in the air. I knew then that whatever happened next, this was no ordinary schoolyard spat. This was a standoff. I was about to step forward and intervene, but Emma stopped me with a hand on my arm. Her eyes met mine, and the calm intensity in them froze me in place. "Dad, let me handle it," she whispered. I swallowed hard. I wanted to argue to protect her, but I knew deep down she was capable. Her confidence was absolute, and I realized for the first time that she had a strength I couldn't match. She had been training for years for moments like this, and now she was ready to show it, not recklessly, but with precision. The bullies stepped closer, and Emma shifted slightly, her stance subtle but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. I watched in silent awe as she moved with the ease of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. She didn't shout, she didn't gesture aggressively, she simply adjusted her weight, planted her feet, and prepared. One of the bullies sneered, "You think you're tough, huh?" Emma's response was a single, quiet word, "Enough." That one word carried more weight than any insult, any threat. It was calm, firm, and filled with authority that made the bullies falter just slightly. I could see it in their faces. They were used to intimidation, to having control. But Emma was different. A tense silence fell over the hallway. Teachers and students had begun to notice, gathering in small clusters at a safe distance. Every eye was on Emma and those two HOA kids. My stomach tightened as I realized the standoff wasn't about physical confrontation. It was about presence, power, and the quiet assertion of self-respect. Emma's eyes never left theirs. She didn't make a move, but every subtle shift of her body, every precise placement of her hands, told a story. She was ready, she was capable, and she would not be bullied. And then, as if sensing the change in energy, the older girl stepped back, the smirk fading from her face. Her confidence wavered, and the other bully mirrored her hesitation. The shift was almost imperceptible, but I saw it clearly. Emma had won without throwing a single punch. I exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and awe washing over me. My daughter had faced the bullies and established a boundary in a way that was both disciplined and terrifyingly effective. I realized then that this was more than just a schoolyard incident. It was a lesson in respect, strategy, and knowing your own power. As we walked away, the bullies kept glancing at her, their faces a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and something I could only describe as fear. Emma didn't celebrate, she didn't gloat. She just walked, head held high, like she had accomplished exactly what she needed to, letting them know that pushing her or anyone else would never be tolerated. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride so strong it made my chest ache. My little girl, my quiet, bookish, always smiling little girl, had revealed a side of herself that few could match. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the HOA would never look at her the same way again. That night, as we sat at the kitchen table, she casually folded her karate uniform and smiled. "They'll think twice next time," she said, and I knew she was right. But I also knew one thing: this was only the beginning. The HOA had pushed her once, and while she had handled it perfectly, the storm they had started wasn't over. And I had a feeling it wasn't going to be quiet the next time. The morning after the school hallway standoff, I felt a mixture of relief and unease. Emma had handled the bullies perfectly, but the thought of the HOA regrouping, of their petty obsession with control escalating even further, made my stomach churn. They weren't just ordinary kids, they were backed by parents who treated the neighborhood like a private kingdom. And now, thanks to their own arrogance, they had awakened something far more formidable than they could handle: my daughter's skill, focus, and determination. I found Emma in her room, quietly sharpening her focus with a series of kata moves she'd perfected over the years. Watching her was mesmerizing. Each kick, punch, and pivot flowed seamlessly, precise, calculated, almost hypnotic. But it wasn't just practice. It was strategy, discipline, and silent warning all rolled into one. I realized then that we needed a plan. Not a fight plan, but a strategy that would put the HOA on notice without creating unnecessary chaos. "Dad," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "I think it's time we show them boundaries." I nodded slowly. Boundaries, yes, but we have to be smart. They're petty and they love drama. We need a way to make them think twice without anyone getting in trouble. We brainstormed over breakfast, tossing out ideas both serious and ridiculous. One idea involved filling their lawns with glitter, completely impractical, but it made us laugh. Another was making HOA-themed pies with rules written in frosting, fun, harmless, but ultimately absurd. The laughter broke the tension, but underlying it was the unspoken truth. We were preparing for a confrontation, and it had to be precise. Emma's approach was measured, like a general surveying a battlefield. "We don't need to humiliate them," she said. "We just need to make sure they understand that pushing people around has consequences. That's all." I couldn't help but smile at her wisdom. 12 years old and already a strategist. "And if they underestimate you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They'll regret it," she said simply, returning to her kata. No bravado, no threats, just absolute confidence. We decided to gather information first. Emma would observe the HOA kids, watch their patterns at school, and note any weaknesses in their overconfidence. I would handle logistics, talking to the principal discreetly, making sure we were within school rules and keeping an eye on the neighborhood. It was tactical, almost military in execution, and I felt a mix of pride and unease. My daughter wasn't just preparing to defend herself, she was preparing to teach a lesson, and I was a part of it. The day moved slowly, each hour dragging with anticipation. Every time a car door slammed outside, I flinched. Was it another HOA parent coming to provoke trouble? Each email notification, each unexpected text from neighbors, felt like it could be the start of a new escalation. Emma remained calm, folding her uniform neatly, checking her stance in the mirror, moving with quiet precision. Watching her, I realized I was no longer the one protecting her. She was the calm eye in our storm, and I was the nervous parent in the surrounding chaos. By the afternoon, we had a plan, subtle, clever, and entirely within the rules. Emma would assert her presence at school, not through aggression, but by displaying quiet confidence and unwavering composure. I would monitor the HOA parents, intercept petty complaints before they escalated, and quietly document everything. It wasn't revenge, it was prevention, a psychological lesson in boundaries. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of our suburban street, I watched Emma practice one last time in the backyard. Her movements were sharp, fluid, and commanding. I realized that her power didn't come from force, it came from control, discipline, and focus. She wasn't a child to be underestimated, and the HOA, with all their rules and self-importance, had no idea what they were up against. As we sat down for dinner, the tension was palpable but underlaid with humor. "Dad," she said between bites, "I think tomorrow they're going to learn that boundaries aren't suggestions." I laughed a little nervously. "And if they do?" She smirked, then they'll get a demonstration, but only if necessary, I'm not reckless. I realized then that our suburban street would never be the same. The HOA thought they were untouchable, that rules and status gave them power over everyone. But they had miscalculated. My daughter wasn't just defending herself, she was establishing a precedent. And from the calm intensity in her eyes, I knew they weren't prepared for what was coming. That night, I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the street. Somewhere out there, the HOA was plotting, scheming, probably overthinking every small move we had made. And I smiled, quietly, knowing that the storm they had started was about to come back in a way they would never see coming. Tomorrow, the balance would shift, and I had a feeling the neighborhood would never underestimate Emma, or me again. The next morning, the tension hit me the moment we stepped onto the school grounds. It was electric, almost tangible, like the air itself was holding its breath. Emma walked beside me, calm, measured, head high, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder. I could feel the weight of the previous day pressing down, not just on us, but on the entire hallway where yesterday's incident had happened. The HOA kids were already there, waiting. They glanced at us with that same smirk, the same overconfidence that had caused me so much anxiety. But this time I noticed a subtle shift. Yesterday's smugness had cracks. They hesitated, if only slightly, as if sensing that the rules of the game had changed. Emma didn't rush them. She didn't shout. She simply walked, eyes forward, calm and steady, letting her presence speak volumes. I stayed close but let her take the lead. Every parent instinct in me wanted to step in, to intervene, to protect her. But Emma was in control. And I realized, watching her, that the fight wasn't about fists. It was about authority, confidence, and knowing your own power. One of the bullies, the ringleader, swaggered forward, attempting to intimidate her. "So, you think you're tough now," he sneered. Emma didn't respond verbally. Instead, she adjusted her stance ever so slightly, a subtle shift in weight, a barely noticeable raise of her arms. It was almost imperceptible if you didn't know what to look for. But to me, it was like watching a master chess player setting up the final move. The bully's eyes flicked down for just a moment, and that was enough. He tripped slightly over the edge of a tile, catching himself just in time. The other kids exchanged nervous glances. Emma didn't move an inch. She didn't gloat, didn't gesture, didn't even breathe loudly. She just stood there, calm, composed, and completely in command. I felt a surge of awe and fear at the same time. My daughter, 12 years old, had transformed from the little girl I tucked into bed to a force that commanded respect without even needing to strike. It was subtle, almost artistic, but there was no mistaking the message. She was not to be pushed, underestimated, or disrespected. A teacher finally approached, sensing the tension. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. "Yes," Emma said simply, without taking her eyes off the bullies. Her voice was quiet, almost casual, but firm enough to carry weight. "Everything is fine." The bullies faltered. I could see it in their faces: confusion, embarrassment, fear. They were used to controlling the narrative, to using arrogance as a weapon. But Emma didn't react to their provocation. She made them react to her presence. It was a lesson in power, subtle but devastating. One of the kids muttered under her breath, and the ringleader's face turned red. I could see the tension ripple through their small group. My daughter didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even blink too quickly. She was a calm storm, and they were caught in the eye. I realized then that this confrontation wasn't going to end with a fight or yelling. It was psychological. Emma had flipped the script. The bullies, who thought they had the upper hand, were now the ones uncertain, hesitant, and exposed. And I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of pride and relief. My daughter had mastered a rare kind of power, silent authority. By the time the first bell rang, signaling the end of the standoff, the bullies were retreating, whispering among themselves, no longer smirking, no longer confident. Emma adjusted her backpack and walked toward the classroom with the same quiet composure she had maintained the entire time. I followed behind, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders, but also aware that the battle wasn't over. The HOA might not understand yet, but they would eventually. And when they did, they would remember today, not for the physical confrontation, but for the unshakable presence and confidence of my daughter. As we entered the classroom, Emma turned slightly and whispered to me, almost casually, "They'll think twice next time." I smiled, a mixture of pride and relief washing over me. She had not only defended herself, but had done it with precision, control, and dignity. The bullies had been taught a lesson they wouldn't forget, and the subtle shift in power in our neighborhood was already beginning. Later that day, I could feel it. Whispers among other parents, cautious glances from neighbors, small smiles from classmates who had witnessed the encounter. The storm had begun, and it was clear that Emma had emerged not just unscathed, but victorious. And I knew, deep down, that the HOA's reign of quiet intimidation was about to face a reckoning. That night, as we sat in the living room recounting the day, Emma folded her uniform neatly and said, almost casually, "They should have known better." I nodded, still in awe, knowing that our quiet, suburban street had just witnessed the beginning of something much bigger. And for the first time, I truly understood the meaning of respect, discipline, and power, all embodied in my daughter. The next few days were interesting, to say the least. It's amazing how quickly news travels in a small suburban school. By midweek, the hallway incident had turned into a whispered legend. I could feel it whenever I walked past groups of parents or kids, sideways glances, quiet giggles, and subtle nods of recognition. Emma had become a sort of quiet celebrity, but not the kind that sought attention. She hadn't bragged or boasted. She had merely stood her ground, and the rest of the world had taken notice. The HOA, however, did not take notice lightly. By Thursday morning, the emails started arriving, long, painstakingly detailed messages from the bullies' parents, complete with their own dramatized account of what had happened. They accused Emma of provoking the incident, of making their kids feel unsafe, and most absurdly of being intimidating. I almost laughed. The irony was thick enough to taste. These were the same people who had pushed, shoved, and tried to humiliate her in the first place. Emma leaned over as I read one of the emails. "Dad, do you want me to respond?" I shook my head, trying not to grin. "No, let's let the adults handle this well, mostly." She rolled her eyes, her signature smirk appearing for the first time in days. "Fine, but I promise, if they try anything again, they'll regret it." The humor in her tone was almost chilling. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And somehow, despite the absurdity of the situation, it made me feel safe knowing she was capable. That afternoon, the hallway tension reached its peak. I walked Emma to her locker to check in, and as we approached, I could feel the bullies' stares. Their smugness had returned, but this time it was shakier, more forced. I noticed the ringleader's hand twitch slightly, the same subtle nervous tick that betrayed a student who had been caught off guard. Emma stopped at her locker, her posture relaxed, shoulders back, head held high. She didn't speak, didn't confront, didn't even glance directly at the bullies. And yet the effect was immediate. The hallway shifted, the energy changed, and the bullies began to shuffle, whispering nervously to one another. It was remarkable, the complete authority my daughter commanded without lifting a finger. Later that evening, the HOA tried a more direct approach. One of their parents came by our house, claiming it was a friendly neighborhood visit to discuss mutual concerns. I answered the door cautiously, nodding the slight tension in their smile and the too polished politeness in their tone. "We just wanted to talk," she began, her words coated in sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "About the incident at school, we think maybe things got a little out of hand. Perhaps a misunderstanding." I raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding," I said slowly, keeping my tone calm. "You mean the part where your children knocked my daughter to the ground?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Well, yes, but we just want everyone to move on peacefully." Emma appeared behind me, arms crossed, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Move on peacefully," she echoed, her voice calm but firm. "You mean, forget what you did and hope I don't stand up next time?" The woman blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Emma's presence alone made her falter. It was subtle, but I could see the shift. The confidence that once radiated from the HOA parent was now strained, uncertain. Emma didn't need to shout. She didn't need to threaten. She just existed in that space, calm and unyielding, and the effect was devastating. After a tense few moments, the woman mumbled something about misunderstandings again and left, closing the door quickly behind her. Emma turned to me with that small, knowing smile. "They're starting to learn," she said quietly. I exhaled, a mix of relief and admiration washing over me. This wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but it was clear that the balance of power was beginning to shift. The HOA, for all their rules, for all their supposed authority, had underestimated my daughter. They had assumed intimidation would work. They had assumed they could control the narrative. And now, they were realizing that they had miscalculated. That night, I watched Emma practice in her room again. Her movements were precise, deliberate, almost meditative. Each kick, each punch, each pivot was a reminder that discipline, confidence, and self-respect could be far more powerful than anger or aggression. And as I sat there, watching her, I realized something important. This wasn't just about defending herself. This was about sending a message to the school, to the neighborhood, to the HOA, that no one, not even those who believed themselves untouchable, could push her around. By the time we went to bed, the tension had eased slightly, but I knew the storm wasn't over. The HOA had been humiliated in their own way, and they wouldn't forget it. And I had a feeling that when they tried again, they would learn that some lessons can't be ignored. Tomorrow, the next phase would begin, and I had no doubt that Emma was ready for it. The next morning felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air that I couldn't ignore, a sense that the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Emma and I walked to school, side by side, and I noticed subtle changes, parents whispering as we passed, other kids giving her approving nods, and even the teachers exchanging knowing glances. Somehow, the story of what had happened in the hallway had spread, but it wasn't rumors or exaggeration, it was respect. When we reached the school, I saw them immediately, the HOA kids standing in a small group near the lockers. Their faces were pale, their usual smugness replaced by visible uncertainty. It was clear they had realized their usual tactics no longer worked. Emma didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her calm confidence radiated, and it was enough to make them uneasy. Then came the unexpected twist. The principal appeared, flanked by a couple of teachers. She walked straight toward us, smiling in that quiet, professional way that commanded attention without yelling. "Emma," she said, her tone warm but firm, "I want you to know that we've been watching. What happened in the hallway, your composure, your ability to defend yourself, was remarkable." I blinked. The principal, normally reserved, almost stoic, was praising my daughter in front of the whole school. Emma's eyes flicked to me, just a brief flash of amusement crossing her face. I couldn't help but grin nervously. "They've been reporting back," the principal continued, nodding toward the HOA kids. "Your ability to stay calm, measured, and assertive has set an example for everyone, including them." I could see the bullies' faces shift from arrogance to embarrassment, then to mild panic. Their parents, carefully crafted email complaints, and whispered threats had backfired spectacularly. Emma hadn't just defended herself, she had become a symbol of quiet authority, the kind that leaves people second-guessing every move they make. Emma straightened her shoulders, not a hint of pride or arrogance on her face. She was calm, collected, and entirely in control of the moment. She had learned long ago that true strength doesn't come from showing off, it comes from restraint, focus, and letting others realize their own mistakes. As the principal left, still smiling and shaking her head in disbelief, I noticed something amazing. The other students who had once feared the HOA kids' influence were now openly impressed. Whispers of admiration and quiet cheers followed Emma wherever she walked. It was subtle, but the momentum had shifted completely. The HOA had thought they could intimidate her, but now, for the first time, they were on the defensive. Later that afternoon, I received a text from a neighbor. "Did you see what your daughter did today? Absolute legend." I laughed softly. It was absurd, yes, but also true. Emma had handled an impossible situation with poise, skill, and just enough intimidation to make sure the message was clear. And then the subtle humor kicked in. I heard one of the HOA parents muttering on their phone, clearly packing in frustration. "I don't understand, she's 12, how what?" It was almost comical if it weren't so vindicating. The bullies' sense of control had evaporated, replaced with confusion and fear. That evening, Emma and I sat on the porch, watching the sun set over our quiet suburban street. I asked her cautiously, "Do you think it's really over?" She shrugged, "For now, but they'll remember today, and if they try to push anyone else, they'll think twice." I nodded. That was exactly the lesson. She had taught the HOA something they would never forget, not through anger, not through revenge, but through skill, confidence, and quiet authority. The best part? It had all been subtle. They didn't even realize how badly they'd lost until long after it was over. As the streetlights flickered on, I felt a strange mix of relief, pride, and anticipation. The storm had shifted, the power balance had changed, and Emma had emerged not just unscathed but victorious. I realized that the most important lessons in life sometimes don't involve shouting or confrontation. They involve standing firm, staying calm, and letting others see their own mistakes. Emma leaned back against the porch railing, folding her arms with that same quiet confidence that had unsettled the bullies all week. "They'll think twice next time," she said softly, and I knew she was right. I smiled a little nervously, still absorbing everything that had happened. The HOA had pushed us too far, underestimated us, and now they were paying the price, not with chaos, but with subtle, unforgettable embarrassment. And I knew, without a doubt, that our quiet suburban street would never be the same. The twist was complete. The bullies' overconfidence had backfired, the school had noticed, and Emma had demonstrated her skill and composure in a way that left everyone, even me, in awe. The stage was set for the final act, the resolution that would close this chapter once and for all. The morning air was crisp, carrying that sense of finality that only comes after a long week of tension. I could feel it as we walked down the familiar sidewalks toward the school. The neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, almost as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. Emma walked beside me, calm and composed as ever, but I could sense the quiet anticipation building in her. She knew this was the last act. When we arrived, the HOA kids were there, but their usual confidence was gone. Their smirks had been replaced with hesitation, their bravado replaced with awkward shuffling. Word had spread. The school, classmates, and even the principal had witnessed Emma's composure, her discipline, and her subtle display of authority. The bullies had miscalculated, underestimated her, and now their own overconfidence had left them exposed. Emma didn't approach them aggressively. She didn't need to. She simply walked with purpose, her head held high, her posture commanding, and the effect was immediate. The bullies' whispers died down, and I could see the unease ripple through their group. They were suddenly aware that they were not in control, and they had no idea how to reclaim it. The first bell rang, signaling the start of classes, but the tension hadn't lifted. Other students glanced at Emma, then at the bullies, and back again. The energy was shifting, the hierarchy subtly but undeniably changing. Emma had taught a lesson without raising her voice, without striking a blow. She had done it with confidence, poise, and discipline. Later that day, the principal called me to her office. I expected a lecture, or maybe a long-winded explanation about school policies, but instead she laughed lightly, shaking her head in disbelief. "Mr. Daniels," she said, "your daughter has turned the school upside down this week. Not with violence, but with composure and skill. The bullies have been, well, humbled. They'll think twice before trying anything again." I grinned, half in relief, half in pride. "I suppose she's teaching lessons beyond the classroom," I said. "Exactly," the principal said. "And she's done it in a way that others can learn from. The entire school has noticed, and honestly, I don't know if I've ever seen a student command respect like that without even saying much." When we left the office, Emma smirked slightly. "See, Dad, sometimes power isn't about fighting, it's about showing you won't be intimidated. That's all it took." By the time we returned home, word had spread through the neighborhood. Other parents stopped by, cautiously at first, offering congratulations and subtle nods of admiration. Some of the HOA members lingered in their driveways, uncertain, trying to gauge whether we would escalate or leave it alone. Emma didn't react. She simply stood in the backyard, practicing quietly, a calm storm that the entire street had learned to respect. Humor crept in, despite everything. One of the HOA parents accidentally called our house thinking they were sneakily checking on us, and nearly dropped their phone when Emma's older cousin appeared in the doorway, wearing her karate gi and mock-seriously asking if they needed a demonstration. I had to stifle a laugh. The absurdity of it all, combined with the satisfaction of seeing the bullies squirm, was almost too much to contain. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Emma and I sat on the porch. The street was quiet, a calm settling over the neighborhood like a soft blanket. I finally allowed myself to relax, though a small part of me remained vigilant. The HOA had been humiliated, but they were still the same petty, rule-obsessed people we'd always known. The difference now was that they had learned not to underestimate my daughter or me. Emma glanced at me, a subtle smile on her lips. "They'll think twice before trying anything again," she said. I nodded, feeling the weight of the week lift off my shoulders. "They certainly will," I replied, "and if they don't, well, you're more than ready." For the first time in days, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of closure. The bullies had been taught a lesson, the HOA had been put in their place, and my daughter had demonstrated strength, discipline, and calm authority beyond her years. But the best part? It had all been done with integrity, humor, and a quiet dignity that no amount of bullying could ever take away. As we watched the streetlights flicker on, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, I realized something important. Strength isn't always about force, and courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's subtle. And sometimes it's standing tall, knowing who you are, and letting others see it clearly without a single unnecessary word. Emma adjusted her backpack, gave me that same confident glance, and whispered, almost as if sharing a secret with me alone, "Dad, they'll never forget this." And I knew she was right. The HOA, the bullies, and the entire neighborhood had witnessed something remarkable, a 12-year-old girl teaching lessons in respect, discipline, and quiet power. And from this day forward, our suburban street would never be the same. The storm had passed, the lesson had been learned, and Emma had emerged victorious. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with the calm, disciplined authority that left everyone who underestimated her humbled. And I knew, without a doubt, that our quiet little world would never again doubt the power of my daughter. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.